Welcome to West Country Wanderings and welcome to a brand new series looking at old railway lines in the counties of Herefordshire and Worcestershire. Together with Gloucestershire, of course, they make up the three counties. Now this differs to my usual Lost Railway Walk series because these will not be continuous walks from A to B. There have been reopened sections, that sort of thing. These are looking at aspects of them, so we'll be looking at stations that closed, stations that have been restored, bridges, tunnels, any other remains, that sort of thing. So I hope you can join me for this first episode. I'm going to start it actually just over the border in Gloucestershire, but there's a very good reason for that because of the line that this talks about in this first episode. So I'm going to take you over now to Gloucestershire, to a place called Grange Court, to start the video there. Today we start our little walk in the county of Gloucestershire to show you where our line that we'll be walking on later in the county of Herefordshire left the main line from. The main line? Well, it's the main line that goes, still present day line, from the city of Gloucester down to Chepstow in Wales and on to Newport, city of Newport. Granted a city status, was it about 20 years ago? Something like that. It used to be a town, wasn't it? But now it's its own city. It leaves from the main line here, or rather our line did, at a place called Grange Court, which was a station on the main line, and it had, amazingly, 4 platforms. So what was this railway line that we're going to be walking on today? Where was it heading off to from this place called Grange Court, which is a few miles to the southwest of the city of Gloucester? Well, the line was 22.5 miles long, possibly 22.25, which went to the city of Hereford, which was a subject of a previous Lost Railway walk, looking at the kind of loop and the branches off towards Brecon there in the city. This line, which headed to the town, the riverside town of Ross-on-Wye, and thence on to the city of Hereford, was opened on the 1st of June 1855, originally as broad gauge. What was that? 2150 millimetres, 7 foot and a quarter inches, I do believe. But it was only that for a few years. They wasted all that money building the broad gauge, only to rip it all up again a few years later, about 15 years later, and slap down some brand new standard gauge rails. Well, they probably reused some of them, but they had to do a lot of work on the permanent way to get it into standard gauge, so it was compatible with the rest of the railway network. So our walk doesn't start today. There isn't much to walk on here. You can see the 2 tracks down there. Originally you would have had another 2 tracks diverging away, and up until a few years ago a stub of that line was for a goods loop, but I just looked down over the bridge there, none of that remains now. The only thing I can think that I can see over there is, this sounds really strange, a toilet block that's left from what was a 4 platform station here, which had good sidings, a good shed, a crane, a waiting room, a booking office and a cafe. So yeah, all that. But yeah, as you can probably gather, we're in the middle of nowhere here. So although it was a junction station to hop onto the branch line to Hereford, it didn't really serve much else purpose. Light trade here would have been light. Anyway, that's all I can really show you here from Grange Court, apart from the fact that the court itself is somewhere over there. There is a well in it and lots of fishing ponds, and it opened in the 1600s and it was added to in the 1900s as well. But that's why this is called Grange Court. Now, let's leave the county of Gloucestershire and head over into Herefordshire. Well, I've crossed over the county border. We're here at a place called Backney Bridge. You can see the abutment of the bridge there and the pillars there stretching across the River Wye. Unfortunately, the lighting's at the wrong angle to show you properly. So here we're about halfway, just over halfway between the city of Gloucester and the city of Hereford. We're slightly north to the town of Ross-on-Wye, which was an important railway junction because it also met the line that came up from Chepstow and Monmouth, somewhere we featured previously here on Lost Railway Walks here on West Country Wanderings. I'll put a link into that one here. But you can see here the railway was on a high embankment, which would have been useful because this floods just to the south of here. Unfortunately, there's been a terrible disaster in the past week or two in the town of Monmouth, just over the border in Wales there. But here it can flow up. That is, of course, the River Monnow that burst its banks there. Also River Wye nearby, but I think it was the Monnow that caused the difficulties in the high street. But yeah, amazing to see it completely, well, the pillars intact, no deck on it. Of course, it would have gone across there. And that here behind me is Backney picnic area. It's now kind of but you've got seating on the top of that, so I'll show you the top of that briefly. And we'll have a little bit further on because there is another bridge a bit further on. There were actually 4 bridges that were required to take this railway from Gloucester, well, the Ross-on-Wye to Hereford bit over the River Wye. It crosses it over 4 times, and that's because the Wye does little swiggles, doesn't it? It's sinuous, all these S bends in it, so I had to cross it 4 times. This was the first one as the railway left the city of Gloucester and just north of the town of Ross-on-Wye. To say the next one there would have been at Strangford. See if we can have a look at that in a bit. But yeah, I'll just show you a little bit more around this site and tell you a little bit more about what was here and the railway in this area. So the site here at Backney Bridge is looked after by Salach Parish Council. I'm not sure if they're the landowner or the look on behalf of the landowner, but obviously there's disclaimer notices. You are allowed to walk over it, but obviously they don't accept any liability if you injure yourself, so just take care, of course. Now the layout is rather strange because our railway came across the bridge over there. Now the abutments are there by the sea. We'll have a look at that, looking down at the River Wye in a moment. But it would have been here, so this would have been on an embankment here. But for some strange reason, the embankment has been removed. And lower down near the road is a car park for Backney Bridge car park amenities area. And then it cut through the land over there, making its way north to Strangford and thence on to the city of Hereford. Now, unbelievably, this location here at one time had a halt. There were 8 railway stations on the railway and also 3 halts, of which this was one of them. There was one just the other side of Ross-on-Wye as well, in a place called Weston-under-Penyard, which is a proper village. But if you look here, there isn't very little here indeed. I think it was open to serve the nearby little hamlet. I think it's called Salach Marsh. And yeah, so that's, I think, why it was opened, but it didn't open until 1933, a long time after the railway opened. And it's one of those GWR affairs which has a wooden platform and a pagoda shelter. Now, where exactly that was located, I'm not entirely certain. I know it with great deal of accuracy, but I would imagine it was around about here. So you've got to imagine this was at a higher level, because I say they've removed the embankment here and taken it out. So we're on the top bit now at railway level, and that over there is Backney Marsh. You need your waders on if you want to walk over there. It is actually open access land, but as you can see, it's very wet, and in the distance there is the Forest of Dean. And that's the top of our supports for the railway going across the River Wye here. Obviously the levels in the River Wye are pretty high at the moment. So that's looking the other way, and as I say, it would have gone on the level here and it's been taken out of the embankment, potentially because there was probably a bridge, well, and certainly there would have been a bridge to take the railway over the minor road, which goes on to a little hamlet called Foy. And so they probably removed the bridge, and at that same time they then removed part of the embankment. Perhaps it had become unstable with the flooding from the River Wye. And Backney Halt closed 2 years before the rest of the railway line did, which was in 1962, and the line closed for passengers in 1964, but it carried on just for a short period of time, for a year, for freight between Ross-on-Wye and Grange Court Junction, and that also closed then in 1965, and the railway track was lifted then shortly thereafter. There are a couple of other stations between Gloucester and Ross-on-Wye. Apart from the aforementioned Grange Court Junction, there was a station at Mitcheldean Road. Yes, one of those euphemistically titled roads, meaning it was a long way from the Forest of Dean town of Mitcheldean. There was another station at Longhope, and then there was a halt, as I say, at Weston under Penyard. And further north of here, there were also stations at Ballingham, also Holme Lacey, and Fawley, as well as that what I mentioned previously at Weston under Penyard as well. So yeah, a few stations on the line, but apart from Ross and Hereford and Gloucester, a lot of the line of course runs through a very rural area, so usage on the line was always light. After the line closed, it was replaced by bus service between the cities of Gloucester and Hereford. There is another railway line, of course, that left, or was, should I say, it would be useful if it was still there, which left from the city of Gloucester heading north towards another Herefordshire town, and that was Ledbury, where it connected up with the line between Worcester, Malvern and Hereford. Now, if they had left just one of those lines, in particularly the Ledbury one, you could have still got by railway to Hereford via Ledbury. Wouldn't that be useful? But no, they took both of them all uplifted now. And to get between Gloucester and Hereford by railway, well, there's a couple of ways you can go, but both of them are quite a long way away. So you have to go up to Worcester and then down to Hereford, or you have to go from Gloucester to Newport and then take up the Shrewsbury line to Hereford that way, adding on quite an enormous, probably a couple of decades of miles between the two places. Yeah, so there's no, as I say, there's no direct route these days, and I guess most people take a bus, which I think are hourly from Gloucester Transport Hub. So our railway come up through here, not along the track that I'm walking along, part of the old refuse site, but here on a higher level. It's really hard to imagine what it once would have looked like with the embankment completely removed. But as we walk on a little bit further, we come to this. I definitely think these are remains of the bridge which would have taken the railway over the road to Foy. It looks like a bit of a bent rail in there. Some coping stones. And possibly part of the war originally that would have been supporting this embankment. And I think the height of the embankment is indicated by this bank here, so the railway would have been at that level. But as I say, we walk up the track, we will come to the original alignment of the railway. Some more coping stones buried underneath this tree on our walk. Sorry about the dodgy lighting, but there we're looking back in the direction of the River Wye and the Forest of Dean, and we're pretty much now on the level that the original track would have been. So we've now walked our way up to the top line, which is the level it would have been to cross over the River Wye. Post closure, this site became the refuse dump for the nearby town of Ross-on-Wye. So I think that was during the 70s and early 80s, and then it closed. And you can see these reclamation pipes to feed the gases off from the products that are underneath my feet breaking down. But this is the course of the railway looking in the direction of Hereford. So now far in this lane we've come to a railway bridge here. Goes on to a farm called Sidonia. Whereas at the other end the embankment had been taken out, here the railway has been infilled underneath, so the railway went right underneath here. Presumably the arch of the bridge is still there, but we've just got these parapets on both sides of it to show that there was once a railway here making its way to the city of Hereford. Well, we've got the obligatory sleeper posts there, left and right, and that's looking back in the other direction. So the lane hasn't changed, but underneath it very much has. It's very hard to imagine that a railway once went right underneath here. So there our railway would have carried on in a cutting heading north to Hereford. So we're following the lane here, and where the railway track bed is there now, that is private. I think it belongs to Strangford Farm, not the Herefordshire County Council land we were walking across earlier on. Well, I hope you're enjoying this first of the railway explorers in the county of Herefordshire and Worcestershire. This isn't in my Lost Railway Walks series because it's not a continuous walk. You can't walk, for example, from Grange Court uninterrupted to Ross-on-Wye, or even from here north to Hereford. There's only sections of it that you can see. So this is episode 1. I hope to show you others. I'm looking forward to showing you bits of the Leominster line from Worcester to Leominster. Did see a little bit of that on the Geopark Way, and also from the other line. Well, there's many other lines that were in the area further north. We did touch on the Wyre Forest previously, but I'd like to look at the section west from the town of Tenbury Wells till it met up with the main line at Wolverton. And there's many others dotted around the edge of the forest here, the Herefordshire side of the forest. And we'll also have a look, see what we can at the line that once went from Gloucester to Ledbury as well. Now up here I do believe we should be able to turn right onto a footpath for a short way. So let's see where that brings us out. So here we're looking back in the direction of Ross-on-Wye and Gloucester. And again we have another one of these bridges. That's the parapet of it here. We've got Strangford Farm in front of us. So there is our bridge, or rather we're walking on the bridge now, and it's hard to imagine what the purpose of this bridge was if you didn't already know that it was a railway that once went underneath here. But as I say, it went deeper and deeper into a cutting. Now that's looking in the opposite direction, and here you can see the top of that tree there. That gives you an indication of the level of the railway. So the level of the railway wasn't where the land is now, but a much lower level, and probably down near where the root of that tree is now. Well, unfortunately at this point we can't continue because that is private land through there, and that would take us down to Strangford Bridge, which is very, very difficult to see because the land the other side of the River Wye is equally private, so it's really, really awkward to get to. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to return to my car and see if we can have a look at a couple of other bits of this railway in the town of Ross-on-Wye. While I'm walking back to my car on this beautiful late November day, I'm not sure if we've gone into winter yet or not. I know it feels like it. It's only about 8 degrees today, but of course it's dry and sunny, so that's fine. That's all good. You can always wrap up against cold temperatures, but it's difficult when it's pouring rain when you're filming because, well, it gets all over the camera and on the camera lens and blobby, and it's just not very pleasant. But you can keep yourself warm by hats and gloves and scarves and that sort of thing. So we're going to walk back to my car at Backney Bridge, which is free to park there, head into Ross-on-Wye. And I know what you're thinking, why don't you show us one of the tunnels on this line? Well, yes, I do hope to do that. Unfortunately at the moment the ground is very, very wet, so that'll have to remain for a future video. One of the tunnels is a village called Lee, which lies on the A40 between Gloucester and Hereford, and that's on the edge of Herefordshire into Gloucestershire, so right on the border. So Lee is in Herefordshire, and there's a tunnel there called Lee Line Tunnel. There's also a company around there which actually repairs and indeed maintains, I think, and builds possibly from scratch steam locomotives. Yeah, you heard that right. I think they're called O'Keefe. I'll put a link into their website in the description of today's video. I think I've mentioned that before when I did another video in the nearby Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire. So there was that tunnel. There was also a tunnel at Strangford on the other side of the river here, and there were a couple of tunnels. One of them, well, it goes under a different name. One of them, I think it's called Ballingham Tunnel. It sometimes might be known as Kidney Hill Tunnel, off the top of my head. But there's 4 tunnels altogether. Some are more accessible than others. So I think it might be worth seeing if we can see anything of Lee Line Tunnel next time on the little explore, looking at the Gloucester, Ross-on-Wye and Hereford Railway. So we'll see what we can see in Ross-on-Wye, not Hereford. Not going to Hereford today. Of course, what I did go to was the station at Bars Court, which, as I say, I did feature in one of my Lost Railway walks, looking at the railways around the city of Hereford. So if you want to know what the station there looked like, look out for that. And also there was another station at Barton Court, which is only a short-lived one, but I look at the site of that in that video as well if you want to see where Barton Court was. So I think the trains that came out of Gloucester to Hereford, or Hereford to Gloucester, served both of those, as well as the intermediate stations, and then of course later on the halts as they opened. There was about 4 or 5 trains. I think at 4 initially, they went on to 5 trains a day, so fairly reasonable service. I say that, you're probably thinking that's not very good at all. Well, it isn't by today's standards. And what you have to remember is when we talk about the golden days of the railways, the services were quite infrequent. In fact, I remember living in Cornwall in the 1980s when I was in the Air Force, and the service on the main line, there'd often be 2-hour gaps, which seems extraordinary now. They've now got an half-hourly service between Plymouth and Penzance, but often you could, if you didn't know what time the train was on and turned up, then you might have to wait 2 hours for the next train to take you into Plymouth or down to Penzance. So we talk about the golden days, but I think these days the frequency of trains, the lines that are still open of course, is a lot more frequent than what it was when we had all these railway lines open. And of course the infrequent nature of the services was one of the things that led to their very downfall. Welcome to Ross-on-Wye, and that's the hills of the Forest of Dean on the right hand side there, and we're looking along the old railway track bed here in the heart of the town, in fact close to Morrison's car park, if you know where that is in the town here in Herefordshire. And this is looking in the direction of Gloucester, to where we started our video at Grange Court, about a few miles from here. But this was the original track bed. I think it's on the level there, though of course they have cut into the railway embankment. Behind me though is a bit of a railway survivor here in the town. Let's have a look at that now. So excuse the traffic noise, but this is the remains of the abutment of a bridge that carried the railway here. The station was actually behind me there. So here in Ross-on-Wye, that's where I was standing up there on the upper car park there. I think it's called King's Capel, that particular car park. The railway came across here, and you can see how high the abutments are if I just hold the camera up now. But it's good here because they have given you some more indication about the history of the railway here. And it's telling you about the decline, which began in 1959 with the initial controversial beaching report. And when the branch to Monmouth closed to passenger traffic on Monday the 5th of January, the Ross town band were on the platform at Ross to honour the arrival of the last train from Monmouth with a rendering of Auld Lang Syne. And the beaching axe, of course, as it say, it fell on the 2nd of November 1964, the railway we're looking at from Gloucester to here to Ross-on-Wye as well, and on to Hereford. We'll see if we can have a look at the former engine shed and the goods shed, and they're indicated on the map. The goods shed's actually close by to here, so should be able to walk after that. The engine shed's a little bit further away. I'm running out of daylight and time, so that's actually in a garden centre if you want to check that one out, and then that's not far from the Monmouth line over there. But we should be able to find out a couple of way bridges as well. Some great information on here and some great photographs as well done there by Ben Ashworth, has done a lot of railway photography in Gloucestershire, Herefordshire and Worcestershire. Some brilliant examples there. And there's a great bracket single there at the goods shed, the goods sidings there in Ross-on-Wye in the direction of Gloucester. There is a bit of shadow over the markers here, but this photograph shows a gauge conversion train. Remember I said originally the line at a Grange Court had been built using broad gauge. Well, this is a conversion train which was possibly taken around August 1869. Wonderful to see that. All that hard work just after a few years of just having it installed. Now, before we complete our little tour, just to point this out, which is rails. Yes, look at that. We have standard gauge and broad gauge. Wonderful. It always looks oversized, doesn't it, broad gauge? So what is it, 7 foot and a quarter inches there? I've forgotten what it was in metric now, put that in below. But yeah, completely different to the standard gauge, which they've recreated here in the town of Ross-on-Wye, and it's absolutely wonderful to see that. Apologies for the shadows and lighting, but there's Grange Court Junction, where we started our video, and then we headed over to Backney Halt, and here we're in the town of Ross-on-Wye, where the line joined up from Monmouth. There's a line going on there, and it went across those 4 bridges: Backney, Strangford, Ballingham, and then finally Aigan, which is the final one, into Barscourt Station as it joined at Rotherwas. Appropriately here in Ross-on-Wye, that house is called Bridge House here on Over Ross Street. So we're in station approach now, lots of industrial units around here, but you can still see evidence of rails. They've used it to shore up that wire outside this factory here in Ross-on-Wye, so there's still surprising amounts to see. Though the station itself doesn't exist, we have another bit of abutment here cutting across, so the railway would have come across this way. So I'll just turn around. You can see all kinds of bits and bobs here which were used, I think, part of the former railway yard. So yeah, so we have this bit here. So there, sorry about the dodgy lighting. There we have another abutment there. So the railway is going across the top here to the station where it met up with the line from Monmouth up the beautiful Wye Valley. I would love to have travelled on that line. Now there is a ramp here. Now I don't think this is particularly to do with the railway, though it may have been for loading trucks at a later point. It looks like it's now used for coaches. And that's this here. Yeah, that ramp there. No, it's not a platform, but was that used for a railway purpose previously? I'm not sure. Please let me know your thoughts on that one, if you know this area. And yeah, so we're heading over to what I think is the former goods shed. In fact, I think I can just see the back of it just over there. Back of Morrison's now, down a public footpath into this area where there's lots of commercial vehicles, and our railway line is on an embankment here running into the station site, and as I say, the goods shed was just over there. Now on Station Street, on the way over to the station site, we have a weighbridge. I saw one the other day in one of my canal series on the Wilton Barks Canal there at Dauncey. This one's a little bit braver, but it's been tarmacked in, so I can't give you the details of it, but certainly would have been related to the railway here. I love the fact they got this plaque here. The goods shed is one of the last remaining structures in Ross on the Great Western Railway Gloucester to Hereford branch line. The line was officially opened as the Hereford, Ross and Gloucester Railway on the 1st of June 1855, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. On this day the first trains arrived, but they were decorated with flags and the goods shed was put to entertaining use, entertaining some 2,000 local school children from the area with tea served from a 60 gallon indeed Great Western Railway tank. Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that bit about the tank and the 2,000 children here when the line opened. Wonderful to see. As we explained, that GWR took it over in 1863, I think it was, and then it became standard gauge in 1869. So that's it from here, from the town of Ross-on-Wye. I'll go back now to Backney to close today's video, looking at discoveries of railways in Herefordshire and Worcestershire. But we will return to Ross-on-Wye again because there is more to see. There is an engine shed which is near the garden centre, and there are a couple more bridges as well as embankments as well. And we'll see if we can do a walking section by the River Wye another time on this railway line here in Herefordshire. That's it for today here on West Country Wanderings, looking at aspects of railways in the counties of Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and looking specifically today at the line that once left the city of Gloucester and connected it to the equally fabulous city of Hereford, with both stunning cathedrals on there, and looking at various bits of the railway, including the amazing remains of Backney Bridge there, and a couple of bits and pieces around the town of Ross-on-Wye here in Herefordshire. Hope you can join me again in the new year for another one in this series, looking at different aspects. It may be more of this particular line next time, or a different line in those two counties, which also crossed over, of course, into neighbouring Gloucestershire. They also dipped into Wales and Shropshire as well, of course, but we're specifically going to focus on those two counties for remains of that, and any hints and tips really. So if you've explored those two counties for old railway lines yourself, then please drop a comment in the usual way below. My lost railway walks will continue. I'm not getting rid of that will continue, but you can't do these doing lost railway walks because, as I explained, they're not continuous walks because of land ownership rights, that sort of thing. I'd love for them to reopen again to be that very thing, but until that happens we just have to look at sections of them, unfortunately. Until next time on West Country Wanderings, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, and I hope to see you on the channel again very, very soon. All the best for now. Cheers. Goodbye.